right, we are at 19 of our 25 attendees. Oh, we lost one. 18 of our attendees. So I think we'll give it another minute or so before we dive in for any latecomers. Hopefully number 19 comes back. I see some familiar names on our attendee list. All right, well, we're up to 20 and it's 2:03, so I think we'll get started. If Dominique, you want to unshare just for a second so everybody can see our lovely panel. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our very first QAM webinar ever. It's very exciting. We've practiced a little bit, so hopefully we will keep the technical difficulties to a minimum, but also please bear with us. I guess I'll introduce myself first. My name's Laura Brawarney. I am the culture supervisor for the town of Windsor, Colorado, and I'm also on the board of the Colorado-Wyoming Association of Museums. My main duties were to plan our conference, which we unfortunately had to cancel, and so we are hosting a series of webinars throughout the summer to kind of provide a lot of that professional development that people have missed out on since our conference was canceled, and we're doing it all for free. So we are super excited to kind of have our first foray into digital learning here with QAM. Our webinar topic today is building your online portfolio for museum professionals. And we have a lovely panel of ladies here, and I'll kind of introduce them briefly one by one so they can wave at you and you can see their face before we disappear behind the PowerPoint. So we have Dominique Alhambra, who is the Anthropology Collections Manager at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, one of my favorite museums. Ashley Muggli is the Collections Assistant at the University of Colorado-Boulder Museum of Natural History. And Jessie Dutton-Kenny is a museum preparator at the San Francisco International Airport Museum. So she is joining us all the way from California. So we've kind of got people from both coasts, I think. So this is pretty exciting. We're not just reaching out to Colorado and Wyoming for this one. So that's pretty exciting. I want to start off with a quick poll. So I'm going to throw this up on your screen. Just to get an idea how many of you guys have an online portfolio, have one but it's old, or have no idea what we're talking about and you're here to hopefully figure that out and maybe start one of your own. So I will admit that I don't have an online portfolio, so I am here learning about as much as everybody else. So we're still waiting on a couple more. It looks like nobody actually has one, which is great. So that means we can get as much as possible out of this webinar. Most people don't have one yet, so hopefully that means that after today you will have all of the tools necessary. Excellent. So I will, let's see, I can share these with you. So if everybody wants to take a look, our number one answer there, 65% of you don't have one yet. It's an important word. All right, so I am gonna stop talking now. I will be acting kind of as the moderator, and I will be kind of controlling the Q&A, so you are able to ask questions. I will answer the ones that I can, and I will direct the ones I can't to our expert panelists. And then we also have the chat open right now, so if you can't hear something, or I don't know, something goes blank, then just throw something there in the chat box and we will try and fix that ASAP. All right, so I'm going to mute myself and let Dominique take over, and she's going to drive for the rest of this webinar.
All right, cool. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for checking out our webinar on portfolios. This was the basic description we had posted, and basically we'll be going through kind of our processes for how and why we put together our portfolios, and tips and tricks that we learned along the way, and as well as kind of thinking through how it might be useful to you in in your career. So over here, here are our names and our titles, and you can check out our portfolios. Those are the links. You can also just Google our names. As you will find out, a lot of it is about, being Google searchable and having that information come up right away. So to start out, kind of what is a portfolio and why might you need one? And portfolios are used a lot in creative heavy industries like art, design, and marketing. Those are often the norm. You have to have something to present to either just to show your body of work or to a potential hiring committee. It, like I said, it can highlight many aspects of a job candidate that's not included in the cover letter or resume, especially in a visual sense. And, having a portfolio won't necessarily guarantee you the job, but because, that depends on hiring committees and the pool and stuff that's out of your control. But certainly, it can potentially provide an edge. I remember there was a survey that was sent out a few years ago, asking people, hey, if you get a job applicant, do you even care that they have a portfolio? And it can depend on the institution. Some institutions might think, oh, that's, fluffy stuff and I just want resume and cover letter, but other institutions might certainly be interested in that. And it shows who you are beyond your cover letter and resume. And, especially if you're, someone's putting together their shortlist and they Google your name, because everybody is going to Google your name. Your colleagues are going to Google your name. And so it's great to have that as a result. And, if someone's putting together their shortlist, they might potentially think, oh, wow, look at all this other stuff that I'm learning about this candidate, and that can, push you into the next stage. And one of the reasons we put this together is, with everything moving online and increasing your online presence, if you have the time, and it will take time, if you have the time to put this together, I think it could be an advantage. So, the work that you show is the work you want to be hired to do, potentially.
Yeah, so like Dominique was saying, this is a really useful tool to use when you're looking for jobs and applying and during the interview process. But you should really think about a portfolio as something that's beyond just the interview process. We all have jobs right now. I'm the only one who's currently looking for a job, just graduated. But, Dominique and Jesse both have countlessly told me how much their portfolio is a very good resource to just have for themselves as part of their toolkit. So if you use it only for the interview process, that's totally fine, but you should really think about extending it past that. So it can be a great visual aid for discussing different techniques. I know that in internships that I've done in the past and working, I've used it as a way to show mounts that I've made for objects and kind of showing people how to model that mount. But it can also highlight areas where you lack experience. When I was putting together my portfolio, I realized I didn't have a lot of experience when it came to exhibits. And so that was something I really wanted to get more experience in. So it's something that you can use as a tool for yourself, for your own professional and personal growth. But it's also something that you can use to help others in the field to access resources that you might be able to offer. So it's not just an interview tool. And so some of the basics to just get us started is that a portfolio is really to document your journey, and you're building that narrative yourself. So this can be something for your career, but it can also be something for just you personally to use. It's a support tool. And this isn't meant to be just a copy of your resume or cover letter. This is really something extra that you're going to be putting together. It's going to be a lot more visual. And then anyone who searches your name in Google will see it in the results as long as you connect it to that Google searchable optimization, which I'll talk about later. But while we're all collections focused, this is really something that can be extended to anyone who's in the museum field. Education, exhibits, curatorial, everyone probably should start thinking about putting together a portfolio because they are very useful. And so there's a lot of different platforms that you can use. I know that Jesse and I both used Wix when we were creating our portfolios, and Dominique used Ucraft, but those are not the only platforms that you can use. So there's Squarespace, WordPress, Weebly, GoDaddy. These are all different platforms. They all have different learning curves, pricing, different options to get you to do what you want to do with it. And so when you're trying to think about what platform you want to use, you should really look at all the ones that are available and see how much time do you want to invest in those. Do they have easy drop and like drag and drop this feature and it's there, it's on your portfolio, you don't have to think about it? Or do you want to invest more time to learn coding and build it really from the ground up? So I didn't want to learn from the ground up and learn how to code, so I found a platform that would allow me to just drag a feature. If I wanted a text box, I could just drag it and drop it and fill it in. I could easily change the colors. It wasn't something that I had to invest a lot of time into. So those are just some things to keep in mind when you're choosing what platform you want to use. Is ease of use, what the learning curve is, pricing, graphics capabilities, domain hosting, and tracking. Platform. I used Wix. Jesse used Wix.
Wix as well, yeah. And I used it primarily for the same reasons Ashley just said, that I made it when I was in graduate school and just needed something to start from because I had no idea where to start. So I wanted a template, I wanted drag and drop, I wanted it super easy. And from working on it for the past few years, I've now made it a lot more my own and pretty much gotten rid of the template, but I really needed that to start. So I thought Wix was a good option. And Squarespace and Wix are really similar.
Yeah, I would also add a lot of these platforms have some sort of trial period where you're not like paying for the service yet. And that's something to keep in mind, certainly depending on kind of the timeline of when you want to have your portfolio up and running and Google searchable. There's like a T-minus approach because like to get it Google searchable, there's some lag time you have to build into that. And then before that, you actually have to put the portfolio together. And before that, you have to like put all the things together you want to put into the portfolio. And so, and then of course, any time that you need like learning the different platforms and what you eventually want to use, you don't have to start paying for the service yet until you're ready to turn it on, is the point I was trying to make. Yeah, so just, I'm not a coder at all. So I went with what was like least intimidating and most affordable. So try the different types.
So kind of what Dominique was just talking about, being searchable on Google. This was something that I really had no idea of how to get my platform up and running and portfolio actually to show up. So the nice thing about Wix, and part of why I chose it, was because it has that already built in. It's called search engine optimization, so an SEO. And so this is something where the website kind of like walks you through all the things that you'll need so that you can actually be shown on Google. And so it took about a week and a half for my website from when I got the domain and actually published it to it actually showing up in the Google search results. And then it took probably 4 or so more days for it to actually be pushed up in those Google search results to where it's now one of the top ones. So it does take a lot of time to actually get on there. So if you're thinking about, oh, you know, I want to have my portfolio ready for when I'm interviewing, and so I can be searchable on Google by that time, just know that you're going to have to probably build in up to several weeks between the interview and when your portfolio is there, just so that you have enough time to actually show up in those search results, because that was not something I was anticipating. I didn't know how much it would take. And when I looked online, it said it could take 4 days to several weeks. So just kind of keep that in mind if you want to be on like one of the top parts of Google when you search your name.
So earlier, Ashley said that a good way to think of this process is to think of it like a narrative. And I think that's a really nice way for us as museum professionals to think about a portfolio. That since I'm in exhibits, I like to think of it like planning an exhibit. You know, there's visual elements, there's text elements, there might be interactive elements. And so starting an exhibit or starting this exhibit of yourself for your portfolio, I think it's good to start that with like, what is the purpose? What is your big idea? What's the main theme you're exploring? What's the real thing that you're trying to get across to your audience? Who is your audience? What do you want to communicate to them? And what are the best tools to communicate that to them? And if you kind of think about all that before you actually start putting content out there and start putting visuals and text in, that's probably going to give you a lot more clarity, rather than if you just start dumping everything that you've ever done on a website that could look like a really messy exhibit of yourself. So I think starting from a purpose-driven plan is a really good way to think about this. That could mean it's a job searching tool. That could mean it's just a tool of like being a professional in the field. Like, I know Dominique and I use ours primarily as that, just maintaining a presence so that our colleagues can find us and can find examples of our work. Maybe it's just a personal thing. Maybe you don't publish it right away and it's just a way for you to keep an archive of your own work or your own resources or photographs of you. Or maybe it's all three. I know that my purpose has changed a lot. My purpose for my portfolio has changed a lot over time. When I first made it, it was just a job searching tool. I was fresh out of graduate school and I like needed to show people my work so that they could see what I had done. So this is an example of the portfolio that I made in graduate school, and it was super detailed. It had sections on collections, exhibitions, research, videos I had made, and then within that there were multiple pages with multiple sections for like mounts I had made and storage planning and digitization and collections moves, and there was just a lot of content. And then, and that was very helpful at the job searching stage because some of those job descriptions ask for each of those things. And so I felt like I needed to showcase that. This is my portfolio now, and my purpose has changed a lot because I've been at the same institution at the SFO Museum here in California for a few years now, and I've had a few different roles there. And so I'm a lot more focused on my role within the institution, and I'm not applying for as many jobs now. And so I've kind of changed my portfolio up. I got rid of a lot of the text, made it very visual, and made it more of that like professional presence and archive tool for myself. And I added a lot more personal stuff in there. Like I added my own artwork that I do in ceramics and stained glass, because in my job and just in my personal life, I've been interacting with a lot more artists, and they'll ask like, what do you do? What kind of art do you make? And I say, oh, actually, here's my portfolio. And then they can see both my professional work and my personal work. And that's been a really useful tool for me. But who knows, like if I, after this crisis, if I need to look for work again, I might change my portfolio back. And so there's just no harm in constantly reevaluating what is the purpose and is this the most effective way for me to communicate what I need? If it's not, maybe you need to change it every year or you just need to reevaluate it periodically. And in line with thinking of your purpose, you should always be thinking of your audience. How is your user actually going to be interacting with this? For mine, it's not super interactive. It's a menu with a few pages, and those pages lead to visuals with some text, but there's not a lot of clicking around that someone has to do because that's not really how I want people to interact with it. I don't want them to have to be going too far in to find what I want them to find. I prefer like a scroll method where they can just kind of mindlessly scroll down and be like, oh, more photos, and they can click on things if they can click on the photos if they want. But I think it's good to think about how many steps should someone have to take, literally steps, clicks that they should have to take to get to the information that you want them to get to. If you're applying for jobs and you need them to see evidence of you working with collections, that shouldn't be buried 4 pages deep. It shouldn't be about me, click, 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 before they get to the meat of what you're trying to communicate. And that's gonna also take a lot of time for you to build in that architecture of clicking through. Like each link is an action that you have to take building it. So in what we were saying about how much time this might take, think of how complex you make your site architecture, because not only does that affect you as the creator and the person who has to maintain all those links over time, but it really can affect how your users interact with it. And so just some basics to think about when you're starting to put together your purpose and thinking about how you want people to interact with it. How many pages do you want? This is what we put together as just the basics of what you should think about including in your portfolio. You don't have to include all of these. These are just some ideas to start from. So a landing page introducing yourself, that could be just like the objective statement that a lot of folks have on their like LinkedIn or on like some resumes, people like to put an objective statement. This would be a good place to put that, where you just say like, I'm a museum professional in this region and I primarily work on these kinds of things. You'd also want to include some way for people to access your CV or resume. That could be like on mine, it's a scroll method. They can view my experience there. It's like a bit shortened than my long CV, but it's available right on the screen. But you could have that be like a click here to download my resume, or you could have a link to your LinkedIn, some way for them to see your work history. And then a way for people to contact you. Again, that could just be your information, or it could be like a form that they send you, or again, like links to your social media or LinkedIn or something else. And if you think about those 3, that's essentially just like a business card, right? That's just who you are, how to contact you, this is what your work experience is. But what makes it actually a portfolio is the rest of what you'd put in there. So pictures of your work, projects, documents, publications that you've worked on, who you are, a section about yourself, who you are outside of the museum. And then maybe those are like separated into different sections. Like on mine, it's collections, exhibitions, and research projects, but maybe for someone else that would be all exhibitions, and then within that it might be curatorial work or collections work on different exhibitions. So however you decide to organize it, the rest of what you put in there beyond just who you are and how to contact you is really the meat of your portfolio.
All right, so to start out, if you're newer to this field, and you don't have necessarily a whole lot of job experience, your portfolio can include things beyond that, like volunteer or class projects, any research you did for your field, and other achievements. It can absolutely include all of those. And then if you're further along in your career, certainly remember that a portfolio isn't meant to include absolutely everything that you've ever done, because it would get pretty cluttered pretty quickly. So like highlight the greatest hits. I feel like working on your portfolio, that can mean, having to confront a lot of emotions. It can be a challenge in the same way a cover letter or a a resume might be, because you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, what do I say about myself? And it's awkward, and you might be worrying that your work isn't good enough, or there's not enough of it. And but don't try not to let that discourage you. Focus on what you're proudest of. Pick your favorite projects. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be for the biggest museum or the most famous museum. But I noticed in the process, as I was gathering my materials, the best stuff floats to the top. And it's about, feeling confident in both the quality and the quantity of your work.
So another important thing to think about when you're starting to put together your portfolio and you're gathering all those photos, before you put anything online, you should really check and make sure that you have the permission to do so. I know that all of us have a lot of background in anthropology collections, and sometimes there's things that are culturally restricted. And so those are things that we can't share. Even if you're super proud of that mount, unfortunately, you need to get permission to share it, just because there might be restrictions that maybe you weren't aware of when you took the photo and you were working on it, when it comes to actually visually showing that to someone else outside of the museum. And so, check with your collections manager, the registrars, anyone who's a supervisor for you. And also, if you have photos of other people that you're working with, your colleagues and stuff, just reach out to them and ask if it's okay if you use that photo on your website, just so that they're aware that their photo is also going to be out there for others to access. So just something to keep in mind when you're putting together your portfolio.
All right.
Yeah, so as you're starting to gather those photos and think about which ones you do have permission to use or what resources you are able to use, the most important thing is to get yourself organized. If you're the kind of person who likes to organize all their stuff in files, that's really helpful. That's how I do mine. I have just a giant folder in my Dropbox called My Portfolio, and it just looks like that. It's just a folder with a million more folders and then a million photos in there. And that just allows me to have somewhere to put something. If someone sends me an article that mentions our museum or mentions a project I worked on, I just dump it straight in there. I don't always put it straight on my portfolio, but I just put it in the folder so I know it's there. It's where I keep pictures that people have taken of me in the past. And I like to organize mine by like content specific issues as opposed to like time, but you could say, here's all your stuff from 2014, here's all your stuff from 2015, 2016. But I keep mine sorted through like, these are exhibits, these are photos of mounts, these are photos of me doing research, these are photos of, every exhibit we've ever done, we make a brochure. So I keep a copy of every brochure in there in case someone wants to see that. And that's how I think you can think of it to start, is just, you don't necessarily know what the end product is going to look like, but a big chunk of your time is just going to be gathering your resources and establishing some kind of organizational system. And this will probably inform how you actually organize the portfolio. If you establish each of these might be a different page, or maybe each folder is a page, and then within that you have different sections. So this can help you kind of get started before you actually invest any time in the site. And while you're doing that, once you've gathered your elements, then you want some ideas or some inspiration of what to do with them. And I think it's a really often reiterated statement to just don't reinvent the wheel. All three of us have examples you can look at. Your colleagues might have examples you can look at. I've found that faculty at universities tend to have pretty good online portfolios, though they might look a little different. They might be more academic focused with more text than you might want. But artists tend to have really good portfolios. Those tend to be a lot more visual and a lot less text. So you might land somewhere in between. But there's no harm in just seeing what's out there. And then while your content is of course going to be your own, you might find yourself drawn to certain elements, like, oh, I really like the way they did this menu. I really like how the links open in this way. I really like having the text at the bottom of the page and the photos at the top. Like, you might just get inspiration for the elements that you're going to include, and then if that translates to yours, you can always tweak the photos, tweak the content, but you might draw some inspiration from just what websites look like already.
And as we've already said several times, just be prepared to invest a lot of time. It could take up to 2 weeks to tackle this project. I know it took me about a week to sort all of my documents into a folder, like Jesse was just talking about, with, you know, having all exhibit photos and having all the mounts I've made photos just organized so that I could easily access them. And then it took me an entire weekend of working on it to really build the portfolio aspect online. And I know Jessie also said she spent an entire weekend just working on that.
I think almost all of spring break in graduate school doing this, because I was about to graduate and needed a job. And then probably every 6 months or so, I'll put in another full day, like a Saturday, just editing it, maintaining it. At least once a year, I put in like a solid day of work to just update everything and check everything.
Yeah, so a lot of the time investment is going to be very upfront when you're first building it, but then after that, it's just going to be time spent maintaining it, making sure that links aren't broken, or, you know, maybe you want to change some of the wording around now that as time has passed, your job is changing and your purpose for your portfolio is changing, but it shouldn't take too much time after that. You know, 1 day out of 6 months is not the worst thing. So just be prepared to invest time. And this is also on top of the, you know, being searchable on Google. That's also going to take time. So just planning in advance of maybe applying to different jobs, just so that you can be prepared when that actually happens.
Yeah, definitely. And I would add that, you know, in the editing and testing phase, you can try it on different devices to see, hey, is the preview that the website is showing me, it says it's going to look like this on an iPhone, is that in fact what it looks like? It, like, the windows do slightly weird squishy things, and you can always, you know, try that out or have other people try that out.
Yeah, I think that's another big part to consider in your time investment is, you know, that this is something that you're publishing essentially. Like, it is going, if you decide for it to be, it's going to be public and available to not only people who might be interviewing you, but, you know, people who might just run into your name somewhere and Google you, and then that's available. So it is something you're putting out there, and it is something you want to get feedback on and essentially have someone like edit it for you too, both for content. So I have a lot of my like work colleagues who know the lingo and know what a mount is and why I might want to show this kind of photo. So I have my colleagues check it out for that and say, like, do you think, if you saw this and you knew me, would you say this accurately represents what I do? But then I also have people who don't really care too much about the content, just like family and friends, click around and give me feedback on just like the functionality of the website. Like, do the links work? Do those photos look really small? If you search for it on your iPhone, does it look really bad? If you search for it on your Android phone, does it look really bad? So you want someone who maybe knows some of the content, that might be like a mentor or a friend or a colleague in the field, but you also want someone to give you some feedback on just like function of the site, because there's so many weird things that can happen on websites where, oh, fill out this contact me form, and then I never got the email, you know, so you want to check stuff like that.
All right. And yeah, I would add, you know, be thoughtful in the process. I think the portfolio is a great way to show some of your personality, but you still want to be truthful about it. Like, trying to come off like you have more experience than you actually do could end up hurting you. It's part of the package you're presenting, and it all has to jive, you know, what you're saying in your cover letter, what your resume says, and, be honest about the work you've done, what you've learned, what you're interested in learning more about. And, if you're trying to scrounge up with something just for the sake of including or creating a section, that might be a sign that you don't need to. And certainly, be concise. If you greet someone with a massive block of text in tiny font with lots of scrolling, that might be more applicable to an academic style portfolio. But if you are concentrating on visual representations of your work, too much text might make someone bored and then they move on without learning anything new. And yeah, the idea of the portfolio is that you're presenting something new to your audience.
Yeah, and so one of the important things is to understand who your audience is. If you're applying to jobs, maybe looking at those institutions and seeing kind of what tone they have and trying to maybe replicate that so that you can kind of match it. And when they look at it, they say, oh, this person really fits our own community and our own, thanks. And so, trying to match that tone with who your audience is really important. This can be achieved through like different colors, what images you're putting on the screen, any of the links and the text. So what you're talking about, as well as like the font choice that you choose. These are all things that are going to combine together and create a certain tone on the page. But you should really keep that in mind. And also, don't be afraid to have fun with it, but just make sure that the content on the page is matching the tone that you're creating. If you're talking about, working with culturally sensitive objects, for example, you might not want to have super bright, colorful, like fun, zany stuff because it just might not come across the right way that you want it to. But if you're someone who works with like elementary school kids, maybe you do want to have really bright colors on your portfolio to show that, that's the work you do and that's what you want to do. So just trying to match that tone with the content on the page as well as who your audience is going to be really important to keep in mind.
And if you don't know, just go minimal, like just be really minimalistic with it. If you feel like, oh, I don't know if these colors are too much, then they probably are. So like I would just err on the side of less content and colors, and you can add these crazy backgrounds, but like a white background's okay too, or like a off blue or something, nothing like insane because it's distracting. But like Ashley said, if that is your tone, if that is the purpose of your site, then as long as you're aware of that, that's fine.
Yeah, and customize. I think the best portfolios, and I'd argue cover letters and resumes, work because it's so customized to that specific person, right? You don't want to be copying directly from examples. And, do your homework on, looking at other people's styles and seeing what works for you, and wordsmith your content with the help of your advisors and fellow students and colleagues. I had written something and I loved this paragraph and I'm like, I'm putting it in. And like the feedback I kept getting was, this does not work where you want to put it. And so, use that feedback. Sometimes that means you have to take something away that you might have wanted to put in, but if it's not working for your reviewers, it probably won't work for your audience. So yeah, proofread and copy edit, just like everything else you create, right? A website that is out of date or is full of typos and links that don't work or has like janky formatting, unprofessional content will work to your disadvantage, but making it, super professional will work to your advantage. And, there's no such thing as a perfect cover letter, resume, or portfolio that's going to make every hiring manager happy, but definitely, do your homework on the institution. Some places are very traditional. Some places want something a little bit more colorful, but make sure that you're striking that balance if you're applying to several jobs, that you have something that will please different audiences. And right, it's ultimately about the work, your work, not just the portfolio. It's there, it's great, but it's about showcasing the work that's in it. So I do have an example from my portfolio. Uh, the Google search results, Google Analytics, there we go. They can track your website hits from not only where it comes from, but also how long people spend on your website. And so this is just, my one experience, and it could vary out there. But what was really interesting was after the job applications closed, I wasn't seeing any hits, and I was like, oh no. But then, I got contacted for interviews, and then I noticed an uptick in hits to the portfolio when I reached the interview stage. And, that was surprising. Certainly they could use it, at a stage before that, when they're putting together their shortlists, but maybe, depending on the institution and, everybody's wearing a lot of hats, it might be later in the process. But certainly, if you make the initial cut, like, keep it up there, because people will continue to look at it throughout the process. So here's what happened. I pulled up the stats, and there are the dates. Yeah, I didn't interview until mid-April, and but then it started getting hits. And while the scale is low, right, I mean, here it says 5, right? But you can see, like, over like the course of the next month, like, that adds up to like 30 hits. And so the geographic stats confirmed it was coming out of the city that I was interviewing in. So that's 30 times that you're making an impression. And, this might not just be like the people who are directly in the hiring committee. This could be other people in the museum, in your department, from other museum departments, colleagues, or your colleagues' colleagues, so I think sometimes, or that can be an advantage, if you're making this impression 30 times to your hiring committee and their colleagues, and someone else, another applicant in the final pool doesn't have the portfolio, that can potentially give you an edge. So, right. So, like, what's the big deal, right? At the interview stage, they are trying to find out more about you. And so they already have your application materials in hand, right? Your cover letter, your resume. So whatever you wrote in those 2 things, you don't want your portfolio content to be too redundant with that, because then they're just reading the same thing over again, right? So this is all happening in the context of what you're presenting, not only in those materials, but also in person. So it's tricky, because you're like, all right, how many times and how many ways can I describe this one project that I worked on? Well, and you can, as you're practicing, in interviews, it has to jive with, what you're presenting online, and what you're presenting on paper, and what you're presenting in person. That image has to fit together. And so, yeah, try to show them something new. Like, be creative, talk to your friends. There's always, like, a new way to present it, I think. Right. Oh, finally, I would just add, be visual. The other thing I was looking at was dwell time. And my stats were showing that people were spending less than 30 seconds in different sections. And they didn't hit every single page. Some really interested folks did, which is great. but, you know, don't go in with like the expectation that they're going to look at everything you put up there, even though you painstakingly crafted it for the last like 2 months, right? You know, 30 seconds is about enough time to look at, you know, a few pretty pictures and a couple of sentences, right? But like statistically, a 1 minute dwell time is considered a really long time in the web world. I know at DMNS, where we track the hits and dwell times on our scientific pages, more on, you know, our project pages and stuff, we count those in the statistics for virtual visits, right? But yeah, you know, you don't want that, them like spending your user, your audience spending a ton of time like reading your text, right? If you go to an exhibit, you're not reading every single exhibit label, right? So also like keep that in mind when you're putting it together. Like, don't have the expectation that they're going to read everything, and so, you know, emphasize the most important parts at the top of your page, and then you can, you know, add below that. But remember that that your audience might not be reading every single word or looking at every single picture. But yeah, remember to have fun and be proud of your accomplishments. I think, you know, a lot of the reason we put this webinar together is that we're hoping we can help people who may be at home and, you know, like looking for like something to do for professional development, or they need to apply to jobs. This is something that you can work on, that you have control over, that may help you in the process. And yeah, and that's really yeah, what we hope to do and help people out with. So yeah. So are there any questions?
All right. We did have a couple questions that popped up in the chat, but it looks like they were answered. Ashton asked about making sure that your portfolio is viewable and accessible on all PC and mobile platforms. So I know some of these sites do give you that ability to toggle. Do you, I don't know about the platforms that you're using, but for those of you that use Wix or whatever, do they have that ability that you can talk to?
Yeah, I know Wix and Squarespace both have that, where you can preview your browser version before you publish, but you can also like just toggle it over to mobile and preview that, and then check. Like, just because the preview tool worked, you know, publish it, but check right away and make sure it actually worked. And if it didn't, you can take it offline for a minute while you fix it or something. But yeah, they should be all. I would assume many of them now can do that, but I know Wix can.
Mm-hmm.
And that a good moment to check.
Do we have any other questions from our attendees, or maybe for the few of you that have portfolios, would you like to share any of your experiences? I can kind of hand over the mic to you guys, so to speak. If anyone wants to share, just let me know. Oh, we do have a comment from Viviana. If I'm volunteering in anthropology collections, may I feature photos of myself doing photography or creating mounts?
Ashley can probably speak. She's working in, well, Ashley and Dominique are both working in anthropology collections, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see no problem with that if you have the approval of staff and it's not something that's culturally sensitive. I don't see any problem with doing that, so.
Yeah, one thing I would add for people who aren't students or interns or volunteers, but are maybe more established professionals, like do your interns and volunteers a solid and offer to take pictures of them while they're working, because they can take pictures of their work, but that's not necessarily proof that they made it, or, you know, proof of them being active and, you know, principal practitioner of that project. So if you're able to take pictures of other people, that could really help them in the future. I've always been really thankful when people sent me photos of me working. So I'm like, oh, that's a picture of me touching a basket. The only thing I have.
Oh, we have another question. Have you ever received feedback from your current bosses about your portfolio after you were hired?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually had a very nice experience with that, which this probably speaks to how I use it the most now, is that I made a series of videos of me making storage mounts when I was in graduate school, and then I put those up on my portfolio, and they're on YouTube, and I had them linked in my portfolio. And we were chatting at work one day, just like working on mount making, and someone goes, oh, well, Jessie knows how to do this because she has all these videos on YouTube of her doing that. And this is someone who would not have been on my hiring committee. This is like our exhibit designer, and they would have no reason to have seen those things, but they had seen those things just because they had Googled me someday and seen that. And you know, that's a person I work with more and more now, and it was really reassuring to me that they had like looked into me outside of work and had investigated things I'd done, and had spent time watching these like 10-minute long videos of me doing something, and then talked about it at work in front of other people. And I was like, wow, that was a cool like networking opportunity that I did not know that they were doing. So I think even though I'm not looking for jobs right now, I still see hits in that way.
Yeah, and I would add, I've also got, gotten feedback, after a hire, and they were like, actually, that was really fantastic. Like, how did you even get started in doing that? And, like slowly I'm like, oh yeah, one day I'm gonna do a how I did my portfolio presentation, and here we are. So yeah, and it also if you're going to conferences, people will Google you, and I also get a lot of like positive feedback that way, whether like before or after, when folks contact me. So I think, yeah, it's a great tool to have.
All right, we have some more questions. Cody asks, when putting up projects or research from college, would you recommend putting up a whole paper or project, just putting up highlights, or doing both?
I mean, I can talk about this. I had a portfolio. I started it before I entered grad school. So when I was applying for grad schools, I actually made my portfolio for that audience. And so I actually put up papers and projects and photos of those, just because the audience I was looking towards was going to be more academic. They wanted to see papers that I had written. They wanted to see projects I'd done. So I definitely did that. But the further along I've gotten in my career and more work experience I've gotten, I've kind of taken a lot of those down. There's some things that I might, post a link so that someone can download a program that I developed where it's, a paper about the program and how to recreate that for someone. But otherwise, I think, keep it as like a link. Don't post the entire paper so it's just like paragraphs upon paragraphs of text. But if you're really proud of it and it's something you want someone to have the access to, then I don't see a problem with having a link so that someone could click that link and then be able to look at it if they want.
Yeah, I would add that in programs like Wix and Squarespace, I know you can upload files as like a Word document or a PDF, so that, and you can set a function so that when someone clicks like a link that you could write, to view this project, click here. And when they click there, it will download the PDF. And so you can do that. That'll take like 10 seconds. That's not really hard to build in. So you can make it like a direct download for people. And that might be a little more useful than like opening up the project in the screen. So then, to read this paper and then it pops up the whole paper, that might not be super useful. And I would just add that same as Ashley, I had a lot of resources up, and then as I got more experience and more visuals, I kind of shifted the way the portfolio functioned, and it was less of a resource tool and more of a visual tool. But still good to have those in your files so that if you ever change your mind, you can throw them back up on the website.
All right, so we're gonna answer Ashton's question, and then we have some others after that. But how do you handle your portfolio if you have a name change? If you update your name, can you make both of your names searchable? What happens when you get married?
Do not have that experience, but Ashley, you might know a lot more about the SEO stuff for Google, but I know you can put keywords in that will be that if people search for those keywords, it's linked to your site. And so I would just put both names as keywords.
Yeah, I would say like the nice thing about Wix is that it kind of gives you those keyword sections and like has different descriptions that you can just change. So if your name changes, then you can easily do that. As far as domains, I mean, you'd have to kind of like cancel that domain and then create a new domain with your new name and then like wait for that to like get linked and then wait for that to get searchable. So it might take a few weeks for that new name to actually show up and switch out with the other one. So there might be like a weird 2-week gap while you're waiting for Google to actually update and change it out, but it shouldn't be too hard of an issue.
All right. So we have some questions from Elizabeth. We'll do the easy one first. Any suggestions on how to make a visual for a cataloging project? So how do you make cataloging look exciting and fun?
I have had to try to make visuals for like weird stuff. So like environmental monitoring. I took a bunch of pictures of data loggers to me and I was like, oh, here's a data logger. I think I've taken that picture out, but it might still be up there. Or like you could make a like a process map for how you do the cataloging, like a workflow, like make a visual workflow and put that up as an image of like, this is how I've done cataloging. But Dominique, you might have better ideas.
Yeah, one way I've seen it done is you can give an example of an object you've cataloged, check to make sure it's not sensitive or, and any of those restrictions first of all. But then it's kind of like, here's the photo of the object, and then kind of there were like before and after screenshots. Like, here's the before screenshot of the completely like empty record with like 2 bits of data in it. Do not show object location. Redact object location for sure. But here's the old record, and then here's the record after I got finished like cataloging it with the description and the age and the donor and the blah blah blah. And so like kind of seeing, the blank record before and the blank record after, certainly before and after photos of like, here's the shelf that I cataloged like before when it was a mess and we didn't know what was there. And then after I finished cataloging all of it. Before and after pictures are really, really, really great.
All right, another quick question. Elizabeth, I promise we'll get back to your other one, but Viviana asks if it's a good idea to include a link to her portfolio in her email signature, which sounds like a great idea to me.
Yeah, mine's in my email signature, so.
We said it a few times, but just put it in your cover letter, like your name, your phone number, your address, and just a hyperlink to your portfolio, because I do that all the time and I assume that's how people find it right away rather than Googling me right away. They're like, oh, she has a website. Oh, I will Google her. So you can put it on everything.
Excellent. And we have a sort of tangential question about mount making, since that seems like something all of you have been involved in. Elizabeth is new to the Colorado area and is learning that programs here really give their students a lot of experience building mounts and containers and boxes, and it was not part of her education back east. Any suggestions on how to gain more experience in mount making?
Oh, Dominique.
Okay.
That's for every
Is that our next webinar? Can we do?
No, it's funny because we're working right now on at DMNS, we're working on a video to actually document our entire mount making process. So at least for us, it's in the works. But as for, so there's certainly, you know, you can go to different websites. There's Stash and you know, those kind of like professional development things where they show their techniques, and you can read up on those. But certainly, you know, nothing beats hands-on, right? So some of it is, you know, a lot of our volunteers in our volunteer corps, we do have, you know, students in museum studies programs who have often like as part of their internship or practicum, like they're like, go and get experience in mount making. And so they have you know, gotten it that way. So certainly, you know, volunteering with different with different collections and different museums, because every museum does it slightly differently. And I think it's mostly about kind of developing that craft skill, like your hand skills and your ability with tools and measuring, and like getting that experience under your belt, I think really helps. And you know, certainly at some conferences, sometimes there's a breakout session or a workshop at conferences where they're like, okay, well, you know, we're going to provide all the materials. Jesse, you did one of these, right?
I did one of the, yeah, I was in grad school, but I was graduating at the time, and I did it for the California Association of Museum Conferences because I knew I was moving back to California and I wanted to network at that conference. And so I did a workshop. It was like a 3-hour workshop for storage mount making, and I had contacted Gaylord and all these other archival supply companies and said, I'm doing an educational program. Can I please have some free supplies? And they gave me a ton of free supplies, like Ethafoam and Backerboard and all these like nice archival supplies. And then I bought a bunch of junk at Goodwill and like fake little artifacts, like vases and stuff that weren't collection items. And we just made mounts for like 3 hours. And it was amazing that like 20 people at least were there, and not a single one of them had ever made a mount. And they were all collections professionals in museums. And I was just like, but in like smaller museums, and I was just shocked. I was like, wait, what? How? You guys have never made a mount? This is so important. So if your conference isn't offering it, but you even have just a little bit of experience, you could totally volunteer to do that, or, you know, connect with someone who you know does have a lot of experience and do it together. But yeah, like Dominique was saying, if you don't have the ability to do a lot of volunteer work, look for those local resources where you could get hands-on experience, like a conference, or I know Colorado has like the regional collections management group, and they do field trips, and they might do a field trip to a collection where they could show some mounts, or it's just a networking way to meet people who might connect you to a volunteer opportunity to make mounts. So right now at home, that's kind of hard, but in the future, those kind of local networking resources might be a really good way.
And through, I just remembered, we have at DMNS, we've offered a couple of mount making workshops through the Colorado Collections Management Group, the CCMG group. We had one. It filled really fast, but you know, we may hold another one in the future once we figure out what the future of mount making will be in this environment, certainly. And we had one in the works in the fall with Todd McMahon at the Colorado Curation Alliance, that's through History Colorado, and we were going to hold a mount making workshop for them too sometime. So we do offer them in the Front Range area like once or twice a year.
All right, last call for questions, comments.
Oh yeah, so I think Ashton in the chat said that she was advised by a mount maker back east that taking jewelry classes was his biggest suggestion to to gain mount making skills. Yeah, and for like exhibit mounts, like now I make exhibit mounts, which requires like brazing and welding, which is a lot different than making storage mounts, where it was a lot more like Dominique was saying, like craft skills where you have to be, you know, cutting, measuring, gluing, taping, riveting, things like that. But if you're interested in that kind of like exhibition mount making out of like brass or steel, yeah, take a jewelry class or take a community college class in woodworking or welding or something that might seem like, well, what does this have to do with museums? But I am constantly looking for community college classes or art school classes that I could take in trades skills that might translate to exhibition work.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for questions, but feel free to Google any of these ladies. We all know that they are on the web, so you can reach out to them individually if you have other follow-up questions. I did want to mention that we do have 2 more webinars coming up next week. On Friday at 1 is a webinar about resumes and cover letters. It's called Apply Stronger. So for those of you who are looking for jobs, I think, I hate to say it, but the job market maybe just got a little bit tighter. So now more than ever, us museum professionals need to be competitive. So that'll be a great webinar. And I think Christina Kane is joining us right now as an attendee. She'll be one of our panelists next week. So, and then the following week on Wednesday, again at 2, we have some representatives from the National Association of Interpretation who are going to be talking about using interpretation skills to make mission-based programming and sort of programming in the new post-COVID world, and then also some information on how to become a certified interpretive guide, which is, if you're in education or ever have to talk to other humans in your professional careers, it is an amazing program, super helpful. So all of that information you can find on the QAM Facebook page, and you should be receiving an email survey after the completion of this webinar, and you have the option there to sign up for the QAM e-newsletter, and that will also have information on future webinars and other programs that we're doing through QAM. All right. Well, thank you, ladies. Any final words before we continue on our way with our days?
Feel free to contact us. Yeah, I mean, if you're, you know, Ashley and I used Wix, Dominique, which I forget which platform you used, but if you have specific questions, you're just like, I'm stuck, you can find us, and got nothing but time to answer emails now. So
yeah, if you want feedback or anything, I'm definitely available. Happy to help in any way. I started with Ucraft, and then I had some like user experience like issues with like blocks sticking and not going where I wanted them to go, so I switched to the GoDaddy website builder. So that's what the platform I'm currently on. But yeah, definitely please reach out. I'm here to help. So thank you and good luck.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days, and hopefully I'll see you again at a future webinar. All right. See you later.